我想邀请彼得·格鲁克曼教授，水鸟真美代表，里亚蒂·贾兰蒂主席，请大家能否打开视频？谢谢。下面我就邀请我们开幕式的主持人郭华东教授。尊敬的怀教授、女士们、先生们、来宾们、同事们，大家晚上好，下午好，早上好。欢迎大家参加灾害风险综合研究2021国际会议。今年会议的主题是致力风险科学，推动发展安全 IRDR 10年之路，构建面向2030及未来的全球灾害风险研究议程。非常感谢各位同事为这次会议的筹办做出的努力。那么本次会议呢，也是获得了联合国国际减灾战略、国际社会科学理事会、国际科学理事会、国际社会科学理事会、中国科协共同主办的。同时的话呢，还有承办单位、协办单位，包括中国科学院、社会科学院、发展中国家科学院。承办单位呢，还有 IRDR 国际项目办公室、中国委员会等等。那么实际上呢，IRDR 的工作，我非常荣幸从一开始就有着密切和深入的参与，已经有10年的历史。那么当时呢，我也是 SEAL 的，也就是对地观测中心的主任。当时国际科学理事会、国际社会科学理事会、联合国国际减灾战略和中国科协批准对地观测中心作为 IRDR 国际项目办公室的主办机构时，我就是中心的主任。我亲眼目睹了 IRDR 的发展，也非常自豪的能与我的同事一起为 IRDR 的使命做出贡献。过去10年来 ，IRDR 社区在促进减少灾害风险的综合研究方面发挥了重要的作用。尽管我们取得了很大的进展，但是正如今天所面临的新冠疫情大流行所表明的那样，我们今天面临的风险正在变得更加具有复杂性、相互关联性和挑战性。女士们、先生们，我们需要从经验当中学习，还需要更加稳健的、全面的研究议程，以便共同行动。IRDR 一直处于领先的地位，但是我们又看到如何进一步的改进我们的工作。这样的话呢，我们集思广益，在这次会议上能够更好地实现仙台减少灾害风险框架以及联合国可持续发展的各种目标。我也想借此机会呢，邀请各位嘉宾发表你们的看法和想法。首先呢，我想邀请国际科学理事会后任主席彼得·格鲁克曼教授先说几句。好，有请。主席先生、同事们、女士们、先生们，我非常荣幸的作为国际科学理事会的后任主席，我来做一个发言。那么在过去的18个月当中呢，我们发现呢，其实每份报刊呢，每一个电视的节目，每一个国家都把风险作为头条新闻来报道。那么我想我们讨论的这样的一个性质呢，是非常复杂的。我们会去考虑呢，某一些季度大家会去关注这个健康医疗，关注经济的风险，关注新冠的风险，而且更多的是一些个人的理解来去支撑这些对风险的解读，包括还有一些人的意见呢是受到政治操纵的。而且我们会发现呢，现在最大的挑战是全球人民能否更好的来进行普遍接种，以及社会经济的发展如何受到了阻碍和影响以及抑制。而且还有很多国家面临地震、 火山爆发、建筑物的倒塌、技术的失误、生物安全的风险，还有网络安全的风险，还有极端的气候的事件。但是对这些议题的讨论呢，非常的不足，令人遗憾。而且我们今天开会的这个时间选得非常的好。现在呢，我们知道有联合国的这个减灾事务办公室，还有国际的我们 IRDR 的这样的一些研究的项目呢，都在进行相关的这个研究，还有中国科学院空天信息创新研究院也参与我们的活动。另外呢，还有我们10年之前所有参与这个10年工作的这些同事，我们可以说在风险减灾方面呢，做了非常好的这个研究的工作。然后我知道呢，今天我们也会发布呢一个非常好的工作报告，10年探索的工作汇编报告。那么我知道呢，现在我们全球呢，既面临全球的灾害，也面临地区性的灾害。那么科学呢，支撑了我们对气候变化，还有一些地质相关灾害的理解。但是我觉得还有很多的空缺有待填补。我们相关的一些灾害的分类和定义的问题，还需要深入的研究来进行进一步的支撑。我们需要进行一些呢分析，比如说呢，对一个单一的事件和灾害的出现的概率和严重程度，我们可以进行分析和测算。但是我们同时也需要用科技来支撑各国发展方面的韧性。那么我们今天所碰到的新冠疫情呢，就意味着我们要改变呢自己对全球的韧性的这样的一个理解的理念。我们要对风险来进行分析，我们对这个分析结果的应对的也要靠科技。那么在新冠疫情的面前，我们各国呢都做出了相关的评估。那么评估意见呢已经表明，实际上很多年之前，也就是在2020年之前，很多人都表明呢，我们人畜共患病在未来一定会蔓延，但是我们的应对又如何呢？特别是在我们的东半球，大多数的国家在这一块呢都没有办法非常快速地做出决定来加以应对。也就是说呢，我们的决策者并没有意识到这样的风险，或者说呢，我们缺乏一些正式的一种体制化的政府内部的风险的评估的机制，使他们没有办法快速的来响应。那么在这个方面呢，我们非常的高兴的看到了我们现在在我们的 IRDR 的这样的一个未来的工作计划当中和研究议程当中呢，就提出了这样的一些要求。我们必须要有呢相应的体制化的一些流程，那么使得我们的决策更加的基于信息和科技，而且在全球和各国呢要打破这样的一些障碍。比如说，我们2022年到2024年，我们很快的话呢，就是有一个气候变化的工作行动方案要会推出。IRDR 的话呢，之前的话呢，其实也广泛的征求了全球的合作伙伴的意见，包括国际科学理事会的一些意见，如何更好的来推进我们数据方面的一些工作，而且作为我们国际科学理事会的大家庭的成员，都可以做出贡献。那么，比如说，我们国际科学理事会的各个这个成员的单位呢，也会加入我们的这个相关的工作。特别呢，是我们的科学自由委员会，这个里面所有的专家都参与了应对疫情方面的指南的撰写的工作。而且这个里面专门就涉及到如何能够帮助我们的决策者更好的能够尽快的来进行风险的预测和评估，并采取相应的快速的应对的行动。我知道呢，我们这个新的国际科学理事会呢，它也是一个全新的这样的一个机构，也就3年的这个历史，是过去的国际科学理事会和国际社会科学理事会合并之后的一个新的理事会。但是我们现在呢，这个里面呢所覆盖了帮助我们社会发展和进步的所有的科学的学科。那么我觉得呢，在未来呢，如果我们的灾害啊和挑战出现更加的频繁，严重程度呢日益的提升，就必须要靠我们旗下的所有的这些科学家各个领域的科学的应对的方式来加以妥善的解决。也就是说呢，我们现在呢与 IRDR 有非常紧密的合作关系，我们也是共同的发起人之一。那么有了我们的这个强力的支持，就使得我们今天的会议呢取得了成功。而且我们会把我们的科学界的这种力量呢带到我们 IRDR 的工作当中。而且当然也要特别的感谢我们中国的科学技术协会、中国科学院和中国社科院长期以来给予我们这一个事业的支持。谢谢。非常感谢 格鲁克曼教授的开幕致辞。下面我想邀请联合国秘书长减灾事务特别代表水鸟真美女士。请您也做一个开幕式的发言，谢谢。谢谢，非常感谢郭主席。女士们、先生们，各位来宾们，我要特别的感谢我们这次大会的所有伙伴，特别是国际科学理事会。刚才彼得爵士呢也做了一个发言，也感谢中国科学技术协会，感谢中国科学院、中国社会科学院、发展中国家科学院，也感谢我们的组织委员会 IRDR 的科学委员会，还有我知道你们的这个国际科学理事会啊，还有联合国的减灾办公室的同事也有代表。感谢呢 IRDR 的国际项目办公室、中国委员会、中国科学院空天信息创新研究院、中国国际科技交流中心。还要感谢呢 IRDR 的中国国家委员会，还有我们 IRDR 的各个领域的卓越中心，还有我们 IC 项目和联合国的机构，还有一些私营部门、社会组织的参与者，包括地平线青年领军人才培育计划，还有 Orientated， 他是 IRDR 计划科学委员会的主席，还有感谢韩立群主任，是我们项目办公室的执行主任。那么我们今天的主题呢是灾害风险综合研究2021国际会议。因为刚才呢我说了这么长的一个清单啊，也表明我们这次参会的人员阵容强大，而且我想强调呢，我们之间的合作和协调在很多领域都非常的深入。IRDR 成立的时候呢，当时呢世界呢就面临各种各样的挑战，包括海地的这样的一个地震，杀死了20万人，导致呢数十万人呢一夜之间呢流离失所。索马里的这样的一些难民，他们也很难保证他们的生计。当然的话呢，在北半球我们还碰到了这样的一个海啸的这个影响。那么在未来的话呢，我们是要进行灾害风险综合研究。那么当时为了应对这些挑战，我们就启动了 IRDR 的研究。我们要解决的是人员的和自然的灾害，能够进一步的加强我们决策的机制。我们主要的话呢是要对我们的风险通过一系列的出版物对它来进行表征和解决和解释，进一步的强化我们对现有灾害的认识。我们的项目呢所面对的是风险的不断变化和发展的这样的一个态势，能够更好的来减少灾害所带来的损失。那么也使得我们的行动呢是基于科学和更多丰富的信息，然后我们充分的挖掘了科学界的这样的一些资源，那么与科学界非常好的合作，非常好的去解决了相关的问题，满足了大家的诉求。那么随着时间的推移， IRDR 呢就变成一个不可或缺的非常有效的一种资源。那么这个防灾减灾方面的科学呀，它是由 IRDR 等其他各种各样的项目所支撑的，所以呢，后来的话呢，也支撑了仙台减少灾害风险框架在2015年的通过，这也是联合国所有的成员国共同通过的一个防灾减灾的一个框架。那么它是赋予了我们科学界呢一些研究的新的使命，使得我们通过技术和科技的力量进一步的加深对灾害的理解和研究。更重要的话是仙台框架呼吁我们要进一步的强化科学和决策之间的协调，进一步的加强利用我们科技的方法，更好的去理解，更重要的是更好的去管理风险。所以呢，我想特别提一点 IRDR 的所有的项目，特别是我们的这些活动啊，直接与仙台的目标相关的这7大全球目标， 实际上呢是直接的强化了全球的合作平台，帮助发展中国家能够获得新的科技的一些知识和创新的一些能力，进行了相应的技术的转化，同时也加强了他们的能力建设的能力。那么最近我们有一个非常好的案例，就是 IRDR 和 UNDRR 和 IIC 联合发布了一个灾害的定义和分类的审查报告，一个技术的报告，是去年发布的一个报告。那么这个非常重要的这个大不同呢，就是表明我们的科学界还有联合国的机构和其他的专家，就是本着我们现台框架所倡导的这样的一种合作的精神，能够更好的去更新了我们这样的一个领域的认识。所以这种协作的精神呢是不容忽视的。那么在这周之前呢，仙台框架呢又迈开了新的一步，而且进一步的强化了我们的这个防灾减灾，掀开了我们防灾减灾的工作在今后10年的研究的新篇章。那么我也是想代表呢联合国防灾减灾办公室，感谢大家呢促成了我们全新的全球减灾研究议程的出台和讨论。那么我想呢，我们今天所讨论的工作呢，会激励今后新一代的科学家，使他们做出承诺，帮助他们所在的社区的决策者更好的去理解如何使用科技，创造一个更加安全、更加平衡、和平和更加平等的社会。我希望大家呢今天的会议的研讨取得成功，也非常期待呢我们在全球减灾研究协议的讨论当中取得成绩。
Thank you。
好的，非常感谢水鸟真美女士。那么下面呢，我非常荣幸的来邀请中国科学技术协会常务副主席、书记处第1书记怀进鹏教授来致辞，有请。好的，非常感谢郭华东教授。尊敬的来宾们、女士们、先生们，尊敬的联合国秘书长减灾事务特别代表水鸟真美女士，国际科学理事会后任主席彼得·格拉克曼先生，里亚蒂·贾兰蒂女士，IRDR 计划科学委员会主席，以及来自于 IRDR 各个组织的代表们、各位专家们、各国的朋友们、女士们、先生们，大家早上好、下午好、晚上好。今天我们召开了 IRDR 2021灾害风险综合研究国际会议，我们希望用科学来应对这个全球的危机。我代表中国科学技术协会，首先我向会议的召开来表示热烈的祝贺，同时我也诚挚地欢迎我们今天的线上线下的嘉宾、专家学者们，还有我们的朋友来参加我们今天的会议。那么为了更好的来表达我的这一些观点呢，那么我下面呢用中文呢来发言，我觉得会容易一些。
人类共处一个地球家园，我们都知道，一部人类文明史，也就是一部灾害的应对史。当前灾害具有频发性、不确定性等特点，特别是近年来我们共同见证了极端气候和重大灾害等事件，灾害风险加大，危及了我们人类的生存。这10年来，各国科学家共同推动灾害风险综合研究计划，增进了全球的共识，推动了科学的方法，探讨了科学应对风险之策，为推进全球减灾做出了卓越的贡献。中国也是自然灾害最严重的国家之一。习近平主席强调，防灾减灾、抗灾救灾是人类生存发展的永恒课题。近10年来，中国坚持全面提高国家综合防灾减灾救灾的能力，发挥制度优势，建立应急救援体系，有效地抵御地震、洪水、暴雨、飓风以及病虫等自然灾害，取得了应对新冠疫情的重大战略成果。 中国践行山水、林田、湖草是生命共同体的系统思想，科学治理土地沙化、荒漠化和环境污染，也推动生产生活生态的良性互动，把碳达峰、碳综合纳入生态文明的整体布局。中国还大力推动防灾减灾和公共安全科技创新，支持科学家开展国际合作，特别是为国际做出我们的努力，与国际科学家携手，致力完善全球灭灾灾害治理体系。这也是在 IRDR 框架下，郭华东教授带领研究团队所参与并做出了卓有成效的工作。中国在国际救灾合作中也展现了负责任大国的形象，向有关国家提供了力所能及的人道主义援助和方法。10天前，我们召开了中国科协第10次全国代表大会，习近平主席明确提出，中国科技界要为推动构建人类命运共同体承担新的责任。因此，我们愿意继续为 IRDR 做出贡献，与世界各国分享我们的经验、我们的方法，科学应对自然灾害，有效驾驭重大风险，全球科技界大有可为。在此，我也想提出几点建议与大家分享：一是能够继续深化系统研究，科学认识治灾规律与防灾减灾方法。我们要坚持问题导向，聚焦灾害关键科学问题，全面系统地认识治灾规律。正如刚才 Miss Mami 所谈到的，是科学与决策协同，有效地防范和减少灾害的损失。2010年 IRDR 发起之初，中国科协就与国际科学理事会和联合国减灾署签订了合作协议。在过去的12年来，中国科协每年资助 IRDR 计划超过600万元人民币，协调开展国际卓越中心、科学家网络等组织建设。我们愿意与国际科学理事会和联合国减灾署共同发起防灾减灾和风险防控国际大科学计划，并继续提供实质性、有效性的支持。二是继续拓展信任合作，提升全球灾害治理体系和治理能力。我们要坚持联合国可持续发展，建立互信合作及制度，相互学习，共同应对灾害挑战。正犹如新冠病毒一样，像前面刚才 Peter 所讲的，新冠肺炎改变我们的方法和评估的机制。灾害是人类共同的敌人，世界各国和科技共同体成员唯有相互信任，坚持科技合作，与防灾、抗灾、救灾相结合，才能使我们的决策来更有效地应对挑战，共同地面对我们的困难。我们应以联合国2030可持续发展议程为共识，推动全球风险防控体系改革，塑造科技全面支撑灾害治理的能力。三是要继续推动开放科学，共同构建人类命运共同体，坚持以人为本，倡导开放创新，不断塑造科技向善的文化理念，加强防灾、减灾、救灾的科学普及，让人们更好地认识自然、尊重自然、保护自然，促进人与自然和谐共生，推动更加公平、多元和包容的开放科学发展，让灾害研究成果惠及更多国家和人民，为推动构建人类命运共同体做出更大的贡献。Ladies and gentlemen, jointly
女士们、先生们，我们希望呢能够共同来进行科学方面的研究，那么共建一个开放、信任、合作的科技共同体，既是我们用科技来化解灾害危机的成功之道，也是我们面对挑战的共同的责任。我们义不容辞。我们希望能够用有效的方式来进行相互的交流、相互的借鉴，更好地来推动灾害风险综合研究与创新。同时，我们希望科技能够真正地增进人类的福祉。 最后，我预祝本次的会议圆满成功。非常感谢大家。好的，非常感谢怀主席。下面有请 IRDR 计划科学委员会主席 Orientated Challenge 里亚蒂·贾兰蒂女士，有请。好的，非常感谢郭教授。尊敬的来宾们，彼得·格鲁克曼女士，水鸟真美女士，代表国际科学理事会后任主席以及联合国秘书长减灾事务特别代表怀进鹏主席，中国科学技术协会常务副主席、书记处第一书记，尊敬的来宾们、IRDR 的同事们、会议的嘉宾们、女士们、先生们，大家好。首先，我非常高兴能够在 IRDR 2021的国际会议上开幕式上和大家来发言。作为计划科学委员会的主席，那么我也热情地欢迎大家来参加我们这次的会议。首先呢，非常感谢彼得·格鲁格曼主席、水鸟真美女士还有怀进鹏主席刚才的发言。他们介绍了我们在灾害的风险综合研究方面的重要性，我们需要呢在科学界来进行合作。同时呢，他也强调了多个合作的领域，我相信呢大家也都和他们有共同的共识。那么在过去的这些年当中呢，我们呢在风险方面做了很多的研究，不仅仅可以看到呢风险的频率它的影响的增加，同时呢我们看到呢有一些新的模式、新的方式的出现。刚才呢，我们有前面发言人谈到过新冠疫情，新冠疫情也可以说是灾害的一种方式，那么也给我们所有人敲响了警钟。那么减灾或者风险的防范，以及呢在发展过程当中的风险，它不仅仅是一个技术性的问题，但是现在呢变成了全人类社会所需要共同面临的问题。那么同时呢，我们这个会议举行的正是恰逢其时。那么我们关于灾害风险综合研究 IRDR， 它是一个超过了10年的研究项目，它是一个跨学科的、跨领域的灾害研究的项目。IRDR 呢，它主要呢是从技术的角度和对于人类的影响和健康的角度来说，那么看对于它的问题的研究，这个问题的这个话题呢也是非常的广泛、非常复杂。那么我们需要呢来自于自然、社会科学，还有工程学以及政策制定者的共同的参与进去。同时，我们还需要呢进行和公众的教育交流，同时让公众也认识到在减灾方面承担的责任。IRDR 的工作是受到我们科学计划的指导的。我们希望呢能够通过综合的研究的方式呢，是2008年的时候当时正式提出的。它一共有3大主要的目标，主要呢包括从灾害，然后还有包括脆弱性和风险，以及呢在一个复杂的不断变化的环境当中政策的变化的政策制定的过程。同时呢还有各国应该采取什么样的行动，如何来进行能力的研究、案例的研究，举行一些试点项目，还有包括像数据的管理和采集等等这些内容所组成的。那么正如我们这次的 IRDR 的2010到2020年的汇编当中会看到啊，今天我们后面呢来进行这个发布。IRDR 呢在这个研究的过程当中，我们呢取得了巨大的进展。我们研究了像灾害风险的它的一些根源的原因，它的脆弱性的原因，同时呢还有我们在减灾过程当中的数据的要求，如何来支持决策的制定者。 同时如何把科学的知识纳入到他们的决策制定过程当中。IRDR 呢，同时呢也得到了国际科学理事会还有联合国减灾办公室共同的支持和资助。IRDR 的这个群体包括呢我们的科学家全体，还有各国的国家委员会，还有国际卓越中心、国际项目办公室。那么更重要的一点，还有我们 IRDR 的年轻科学家的项目。IRDR 的这个群体呢，在过去的这些年当中，那么支持呢建立了一个全球性的网络。更重要的一点呢，让年轻的科学家能够加入其中，来贡献他们的智慧和研究。在过去的10年当中，在合作当中，我们取得了很大的进展，但是呢 ，IRDR 的工作还远远没有结束。那么相反，我们可以看到，现在我们需要更多的来进行呢减灾的合作。正如最近全球的这个研究计划，或者说我们的这个灾害风险研究的计划当中，这将会在我们这次会议当中呢进一步的来进行讨论。那么在这个基础之上，我也想再一次的强调呢，那么这种跨学科、跨领域的研究的重要性。如果没有跨学科的研究，我们是没有办法来实现我们的目标，没有办法来实现我们的仙台框架的目标、巴黎协定以及联合国的可持续发展目标的。所以我们希望能够大家携起手来，和我们的科学界和公众能够来实现一个更加和平的、平等的、可持续的世界的发展。谢谢大家。好的，非常感谢贾兰蒂女士，IRDR 计划科学委员会的主席。好的，非常感谢我们前面开幕致辞的几位嘉宾，感谢呢大家热情洋溢的发言啊，尊敬的来宾们。下面呢，我们来看一下我们在过去的10年当中到底做了哪些工作，取得了哪些令人瞩目的成就，同时呢，我们在未来还要再做哪些更多的研究。下面我们有请贾兰蒂女士，我们的计划科学委员会主席来进行呢介绍，同时呢来带领我们后面发布 IRDR 工作汇编科技减灾10年探索。下面有请贾兰蒂女士。好的，非常感谢。
好，我也是欢迎韩群丽教授代表我们的编辑部来介绍一下我们 IRDR 工作汇编科技减灾10年探索的内容。好，谢谢贾兰蒂博士，大家下午好、晚上好、早上好。我今天呢就非常简短的给大家介绍一下我们的工作汇编2010到2020减少风险灾害的10年科学探索。那么今天的这份简短的报告呢，主要有4个内容。第一，我来介绍一下汇编工作的宗旨；第二，过程；第三，内容；最后是鸣谢。我们的工作汇编的宗旨非常的简单和清晰。第一呢，我们想全面总结 IRDR 在过去10年的工作和贡献。第二，作为一个国际性的研究活动，我们在项目结项的时候呢，希望能够对共同的发起人和所有的 IRDR 的社区成员，我们做一个明确的责任的陈述，提升它的透明度，然后我们来展示项目的进展和经验，为未来的合作吸取一些经验教训。这是我们的工作。首先呢，是在2019年的9月29日，刚才呢，水鸟真美女士可能还记得啊，我们当时在日内瓦做了一个交流。我们协调委员会呢是做出决定，要向全球的社区来提出我们如何做出努力。那么 在这个10月份呢，我们做了会议决定；11月份的时候，我们确定了时间，然后第2年的我们的3月份到4月份，我们就征集这些稿件，包括国家委员会、卓越中心、前 SC 的成员，还有我们的青年科学家。从2020年的3月份到10月份，我们与 IRDR 的成员进行了大量的单独的接触。11月份的时候，我们是批准了执行摘要的草案。3月份的时候呢，我们是有完整的文本草案提供给科学委员会来进行审查。从4月份到5月份，我们是对汇编进行最后的定稿。而且我想专门提一句，就是这个都是在当时突发的、前所未有的新冠疫情流行的过程当中做出的，所以特别感谢大家的巨大的努力。好，下面我们来看一下我们的工作汇编的内容。第一个是序言和前言，那么这个是来自 IRDR 国际科学理事会以及所有的科学委员会的主席来共同撰写的，然后还有执行摘要。第1章是 IRDR 解释它是一个不断发展变化的科学计划，第2章是关于 IRDR 的研究目标和它的行动。这个呢，也是我们报告的核心内容的一个章节，特别介绍了过去10年的工作。第3章推动国际科学对话的和合作方面 ，IRDR 做出了什么样的贡献？第4章讲的是项目的治理、运作机制和项目管理。第5章是关于和第6章是关于我们所碰到的一些挑战。另外呢，在一个多样化和动态的灾难的这样的一个场景当中，我们有什么样的挑战？然后是结束语和附录，这是我们第1章的这个封面。里面就是介绍呢 ，IRDR 是一个不断变化发展的科学计划。它专门解释了 IRDR 做了什么，从冰库到仙台有什么样的一个发展的历程，然后简短的介绍了它2013年到2017年的战略计划是什么，以及2018年到2020年的行动计划有哪些内容。同时呢，也考察与联合国2030年议程的协调问题。它对仙台减灾框架的贡献，我们其实要讨论2次重要的会议，一个是在2014年召开的第3届世界减少灾害风险大会科技界主要团体的组织伙伴会议。这个呢，实际上呢，相当于仙台框架草案的独立集体的这样的一个回应，以及实施它的4+2方案的一些建议。2016年，联合国国际减灾署关于实施2015到2030年仙台减少灾害风险框架的科学和技术会议的共同组织者会议。那么在这次会议当中呢，我们对全球科学和技术路线的线路图做出了巨大的贡献，这也反映在我们的汇编内容当中。第2个的话呢，大家肯定很关注我们做了什么样的行动呢？除了我们研究之外，还有哪些行动呢？那么所以的话呢，我们就介绍了它在3个主要研究目标和8个跨行业部门的次级目标当中产生了怎样关键的影响和成果。这个其实呢，并不是我们之前科学委员会考虑到的。然后在这个案例当中呢，我们一共有89个案例是来自工作组、年轻人科学家的团体、国际的卓越中心以及国家委员会，还有工作组。那么就是这个里面呢，我们有很多的实例是来自不同的国家，也来自不同的科学家。那么我就想简单的举3个例子。首先的话呢，哥伦比亚的这个国家委员会呢，它实际上呢是揭示出了一些潜在的风险。另外呢，新西兰的国家委员会是考虑到了相关的 Kikora 的这个地震的风险，还有非洲大学合作平台，然后包括呢 Perry 大学是扩大了它的学术课程的模块，那么它也是我们国际卓越中心之一。第3章呢，主要是描述一下 IRDR 在推进国际科学合作与对话方面扮演的角色。首先，它是作为科学和政策的一个接口，通过会议和大会进行对话，而且还发布了一些政策的简介和工作文件，同时还组建了合作伙伴关系网络。第4章介绍的是 IRPR 的项目治理、运作机制和管理。那么我们其实呢，也是充分的征求社区成员的意见和评论意见，想了解这个项目如何进一步的深化和加强。我们讲到了，就是我们体制方面呢，还有哪些空缺和漏洞亟待填补。第5章呢，这个不是从 IPU 的角度，而是从各国的国家委员会的角度来看，在多样化和动态的减灾环境当中有哪些挑战。那么包括呢，从我们的科学成员还有年轻科学家的角度来谈挑战和经验教训是什么。另外呢，也涉及到编制新的减灾研究议程。最后呢，是一个结束语章节，再次强调 IRDR 在过去10年当中的使命的价值和意义，突出强调国际减灾协会作为一个整体，在全球、区域、国家和地方范围内参与和互动的方式。同时呢，也强调要通过我们的国际卓越中心、国家委员会，还有年轻科学家群体来进行机构能力建设，同时应对不断变化的风险环境当中的新挑战，并捕捉机遇。那么最后一张幻灯片也是我们的致谢页。确实，我们是一个集体工作和努力的一个结晶。感谢所有的社区成员的贡献。特别是过去10年给予我们的这样的一些支持，包括科学委员会的成员，我们的国际项目办公室的执行董事也是10年，13个 IRDR 的国家委员会，17个的国际卓越中心，164名的青年科学家，还有一些个人专家。那么作为我们的编纂委员会，我也特别要感谢我们的青年科学家联方，是来自国际项目办公室，还有宋婉娟、张海英和王磊，他们是来自中国委员会。感谢他们在整个编纂的过程当中，付出了18个月的艰辛的努力，来搜集材料进行编辑。那么最终呢，完成了这样的一份重量级的报告。那么这是我们这个编纂的最终文件的这个封面。那下面的话呢，就请贾兰蒂博士来正式的发布。好，非常感谢韩主任的介绍，那我就正式发布 IRDR 工作汇编科技减灾10年探索。好，下面大家就集体鼓掌。那么无论您在世界哪一个角落，我们用热烈的掌声正式发布这样的一份编纂的报告。好的，下面请我们主持人。非常非常感谢大家的辛勤劳动和卓越的成果，感谢韩群力教授，感谢贾兰蒂教授，非常了不起的一个成就，非常好的一个汇编。好，女士们、先生们，我们的开幕式呢就要到此结束，感谢大家参加开幕式。我们会休息5分钟，就再进行下一个环节的交流。谢谢。
Hi, Shreb. I cannot hear you.
Hello, do you hear me now?
Okay. Thank you. Shreb, now 大家请注意一下。No. Okay, now the keynote session, first keynote session will start now. I will hand over to, this session will be moderated by the former chair of IRDR Scientific Committee, Dr. Shreb Lawaza. Please, Shreb, you take the lead for moderation. Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much, Dr. Chunmi. And from my side, happy to be here and welcome everyone to the first session of the IRDR conference. I'll be moderating this session together with my colleague, Virginia Jimenez. And before I give her a chance to briefly introduce herself, I would like to introduce myself. Shoaib Rasa is my name, a former scientific committee member of IRDR and chair, and a professor of geography at Makerere University in Uganda, but affiliated with the Global Center on Adaptation in the Netherlands currently. I'm pleased to be with you today and look forward to the next session. Virginia, for introduction. Virginia Jimenez, are you online?
Virginia, you're muted.
I have a, yes, no, it's fine. Thank you very much. Good morning. I was saying it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Virginia Jimenez. I'm a geographer. I'm from Venezuela. Work for the Central University of Venezuela. And I've been a member of the science committee of the scientific committee for about 7 years. So it's a great pleasure to share all these advances for us. I'm from the IRDR family with you all. Thank you very much, Shoaib. Again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Virginia. Once again, you're welcome to session 1, which is about the changing landscape of disaster risk reduction and risk dynamics. As we have heard from a really very wonderful and inspiring opening session, I just want to underscore a few things that we need to tie in this session. And that is the bringing to visibility and action on different fronts, risk reduction, from the climate science as being mentioned by several speakers beforehand, to the pandemic, which in the last over 15 months has, since it broke out, has made a lot of misery and causing a lot of losses of human life and also impact on the economy, while at the same time, there is still very much a desire to pursue the global goals on SDGs, as well as the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction and the Paris Agreement. So given the kind of compounding nature of these very mega processes that are going on, how science can help us to continue with not just formalization and visibility, but also creating knowledge that is actionable is still very much a very important question that we will address in this conference and beyond this conference. And with that, the 3 keynote presentations that we're going to listen to from 3 very distinguished scholars and professors that I have had the pleasure to work with as part of IRDR and outside IRDR. And without much ado, also mention that this is also setting the scene for the new global research agenda on disaster risk, as also mentioned in the opening session. So we have 3 very distinguished speakers today, and we'll first of all go with Dr. Ayana Silman. who will present first. She's going to talk to us about climate change and systemic risk. And Dr. Anna Siuman is the research director at the Center for International Climate Research in Oslo and leads the Climate Impacts Group. She has a PhD degree in Earth System Science and is an internationally recognized expert in the field of climate extremes and development of indicators for impact risk assessment. She's a lead author of the 6th Assessment Report of the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and co-chair of the development team of the Knowledge Action Network on Emergent Risk and Extreme Events, as well as being a steering committee member of IRDR. Dr. Silman, the floor is yours, please. You have 15 minutes and then we'll proceed from that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Shrive, for this very kind introduction. I try to share my screen. Yes, should work now. Do you see it?
Looks like, yeah, it's working.
And it's in full screen mode? Yes. Okay, great, perfect. Yeah, thank you very much also for these motivating speeches. In the previous session by UNDR, the ISC, and the CAST and IRDR, which gave a very nice introduction to the topic I'm trying to present to you today on the latest developments in climate change assessment and sciences in the context of disaster risk and especially systemic risk and sustainable development. I want to start with this slide or picture from the global risk reports from the Economic Forum on the interconnectedness of risk. This map is generated by surveying the perception of what are the key risks perceived by civil society, governments, businesses, and thought leaders. And changing climate is on the top, and connected with this, of course, closely extreme weather events, but also spread of infectious diseases. And as, of course, after the COVID-19 pandemic has started, the top risk by impact was infectious diseases, but still the top risks perceived in 2021 by likelihood are extreme weather and climate action failure. What you also see from this picture is the highly interconnectedness of all these risks. And this leads us to the understanding or the representation of systemic risk that became clearly visible due to COVID-19 in the last year. And starting or staying with extreme weather, the human cost of weather-related disaster report has clearly laid out in a 20-year review that 90% of disasters are weather-related. For instance, by floods, storms, extreme temperature, drought, wildfires. And most of the people that are suffering from those events are located often in developing countries. And one of the action points outlined in this But here, I would like to focus on climate extreme or weather extreme hazards, and especially heat. When we think about climate change, we know the world is becoming warmer, and this very latest study of the nature climate change has provided a picture of climate change. And you see here a lot of countries where the rate of human-related mortality has been much increased compared or has been attributed to climate change. But there are also very many gray areas. But that doesn't mean, for instance, if you look at Africa, that doesn't mean that there is no heat-related mortality. but it's basically a lack of data. If you look at the left map, where you see that study collected data from 732 locations, which are not located in large parts of Africa. So there's a huge data gap in reporting some of the disaster losses related to heat, for instance. While in climate change science, we have recently studied a lot the heat stress indicators in a warming world. And as you see here in red, highlighted are particular areas in Africa where measured by different heat stress indicators, for instance, the Universal Thermal Climate Index or apparent temperature, exceed under a 3-degree world high or extreme thresholds of related thresholds. For instance, very high threshold results in heat exhaustion, or even extreme threshold exceedance can result in heat strokes. And large areas where we don't have much data are affected by a strong increase of exceedances of these thresholds in a majority of the year, over 200 days. So this is alarming. And but what these indicators also show is that we're not looking at heat or extreme heat as a single variable. Climate science, especially on extreme events, has moved towards more complex or compound extreme events, meaning that we are looking at more complex variables or indicators to describe hazards, for instance, drought or heat stress, seeing the combination between temperature and atmospheric humidity, or for instance, coastal flooding, being composed of precipitation, but also wind speed and coastal water level. And so we are moving from single extremes or single component hazards to compound physical drivers that are composed from of different variables, as well as acknowledging that the impact of those compound physical drivers are also exacerbated or influenced by societal drivers, for instance, water management, urbanization, forest management. So that can, on the one hand, mitigate, but also amplify the risk from such hazards. And this we have seen, for instance, the complex or systemic effects of a climate extreme or compound event. We have seen the Russian heat wave in 2010, which was a combined heat and drought event in Europe that had huge effects on the vegetation, caused forest fires, connected with air pollution, having affected not only the heat, the health impact by heat, but also by air pollution. We had crop failures that trickled down into societal or socioeconomic consequences in terms of wheat prices, for instance, and social instability, which at the end cannot anymore be directly linked to the compound event that has maybe started it, but it's a complex interplay between the different system components and responses. And we know with climate change, there will be an increase in weather-related extremes. This is a figure from the last IPCC report, where you see with high emission scenarios, if we continue business as usual, we would end up in a 5-degree world. If we mitigate ambitiously and following a low emission scenario, the blue shaded line, then we could stay below 2 degrees, even 1.5 degrees. But we know with every degree of warming, we see a shift in the mean temperature, but it also has consequences for the occurrence, the frequency, and intensity of several of extreme events. And extremes are changing much more than the mean in temperature and precipitation, and also the likelihood of unprecedented or record-breaking extreme events increases with global warming. So we will experience something that we have not experienced before, and that much more often. And connected with that, the working group 2 of the IPCC had developed this burning embers concept to show the level of additional risk due to climate change for different system components, like, for instance, unit and certain systems, extreme weather events, or large-scale single events. But if you look at even if we stay below 2 degrees global warming, we are already in a critical phase from transitioning from moderate to high or very high risk due to climate change. And that should alarm us. We need to be prepared. We need to adapt, even to if we limit climate change, because we already have committed to a certain level of increase in extreme events and associated disasters. And in the very recent report of 1.5 degree, it was even more disaggregated in terms of sectoral, the additional risk in terms of global warming in the sectors, for instance, heat, related mobility, crop yield, tourism, and how this changes between 1.5 and 2 degrees. And we see there's, again, a critical transition from moderate to high risk between 1.5 and 5 degrees. And also, which is even more alarming, we are getting close to climate tipping points, abrupt and irreversible changes in the climate system that are also more likely if we are crossing the 2-degree global warming. So coming to the underlying IPCC risk framing, which is based on the definition of risk being the potential for adverse consequences for human or ecological system, recognizing the diversity of values and objectives associated with such systems. And in the special report on extreme events in 2012, this risk propeller is since then became very famous, risk being the interaction between hazards or weather extremes and vulnerability and exposure of the system. Since then, this concept has further advanced. And just in the recent concept note of risk, how we treat risk in the 6th assessment report, we have expanded this to not only include the impacts of climate change as a driver of risk, but also the responses. So that has also been much more described in the underlying publication. But key is there in the 6th assessment report, we are having a much closer handshake between the working group 1, 2, and 3 to inform the risk framing. And particularly important here is the responses, because our responses to climate change, and there I include the disaster risk reduction and disaster risk prevention as one response to reduce risk from climate change. And so IRDR has a very important role here. But what does it take to limit global warming below 1.5 degrees, to keep the risk manageable? If you see here a graph showing the global emissions trajectory from today to the 2100 that are necessary to stay below 1.5 degrees. And you see the red line shows the COVID, the reduction that has been due to the COVID restrictions, COVID-19. And you see that was 5 to 7% in 2020. To reach 1.5 degrees, it means we would have the same rate of reduction of 5 to 7% every year. But if we continue to usual, we will be back on this on a slightly lower track, but we will not reach 1.5 degrees. So and that means we have to invest in negative emissions, which means we need to get the carbon out of the system by using, for instance, agriculture, forestry, or bioenergy methods for carbon dioxide removal. And the longer we wait with the emission reduction, we have to investigate or invest in these carbon removal measurements, as you see in the slot above, showing the percentage of negative invention. That means we need to account for our ecosystem services to help us reduce emissions if we don't manage by the energy and other. Okay, but coming back to this new risk framing that was laid out in this Simpson et al. Paper, which expresses that so far in the climate change risk assessment, we have often, or we treat the different components very in silos, and we are not looking across boundaries that could occur on the sectoral space, on the temporal space, on the spatial space, or the multiple responses that are available to react to climate change. So in terms of looking at systemic risk, we need to look transboundary. We have to look across sector. We have to look across time scales and spatial space to understand systemic risk and design the right responses and governance. And this has been shown also in the recent COVID-19 or in the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and we have put out a report, what can COVID-19 teach us about preparing for climate risk in Europe? And there we show how the risk transcends and trickles down from citizens to production to financial networks, and how in between our responses can mitigate or amplify basically the risk. And how COVID-19 also revealed underlying vulnerabilities in a globalized and interacting world. So to take that further, we can learn from COVID-19 to understand the systemic, to work across boundaries, to look at across system scales. And also that means that the basically embracing the UNDR vision that has been put forward in 2018 for the substantial reduction of disasters and risks and losses for a sustainable future entails to see the global agendas like the Sendai framework, the Paris Agreement, sustainable development goals, and other agendas from 2015, to see them in conjunction. We need to act together, and that means complexity is our new normal. If this is an example from a project where we see, of course, climate extremes are influenced by how ambitious we are mitigating our global emissions. But climate extremes will be also a problem if we mitigate strongly, and a much more bigger problem if we don't mitigate. But this has a direct effect of disaster risk. And disaster risk, how we respond to this, to the climate extremes, but also how we prevent disasters from climate extremes, will affect how we can prevent our important ecosystems and other systems from failure that could compensate or mitigate the risk. And with that, strengthening these systems, making them resilient, reducing the vulnerabilities by investing in the sustainable development goals will in turn help us to mitigate the risk. But for that, we need to look across the systems and across sectors and across communities to make progress. So, and I think in many of these disciplines, as we also heard in the introduction talk, this kind of concept of systemic risk, complex risk has arrived, was in place, and also in the IPCC definitions, we have definition for compound risk, for emergent risk, and then outside the IPCC definitions, there were many other terms occurring in reports and literature: cascading risk, interconnected risk, and also in the last GAR report, a definition for systemic risk has been formulated. And systemic risk is something that has been touched upon due to recent events like the financial crisis, like COVID, but it's not clear yet what is the definition, what is it, and how can we govern it. So in a recent activity by the RISC-CAN, the Knowledge Action Network on Emerging Risk and Extreme Events, we are working on a briefing note supported by the UNDR and the International Science Council to express or to give a summary of what is the recent science and knowledge about systemic risk, and what are recommendations for further collaboration across the different communities and for practitioners. And the RISC-CAN is a joint activity by Future Earth, the Sustainability Sciences, IRDR, WCRP, the World Climate Research Program, and the World Weather Research Program. And as you see, hopefully saw in my talk, we need all these scientists to work together to approach these global agendas. And the risk-con is one of those connecting points where we look at emergent risks from climate extremes as a key threat to sustainable development and the DRR ambitions. And in the focus of the risk-con, we have the environmental change context, climate-related and a multi-hazard context. We want to provide system views linking physical, biological, and societal subsystems in a data and concept-driven, evidence-based way. And we see there are great synergies with all of these communities and also uniqueness in the joint effort that we can accomplish. And especially also what we heard here later in the research agenda, the new research agenda from IRDR, systemic risk is in the focus, and the risk card can be an important collaborator in implementing this research agenda. So coming to the conclusion, systemic risk is considered as important in many disciplines, climate finance, disaster risk, and there is plenty of opportunities and the necessity to work across the communities, including the data collection and sharing, as I showed in my first slide. And it's basically, when we're talking about systemic risk, is it what do we need to monitor? What do we need to measure in order to be able to manage or reduce systemic risk? And then we need, in all these endeavors, we need to embrace complexity and engage in systems thinking in order to address successfully the 2030 global agenda. And with that, I thank you very much, and yeah, happy to take questions if there are.
Thank you very much, Dr. Silman, for that presentation, very inspiring, but also for being on time. I just want to use this opportunity at this point in time to tell all attendees to inform you that you can post your questions in the Q&A, but you can also continue with the conversations in the chat. But in under 2 minutes, I would like to give a chance to anybody who has a really burning question to Jana. And it will be first come, first serve if you show your hand up for a very quick and short question that could be burning. Okay. I don't see any hand up. Thank you so much once again, Jana. We'll come back to the discussions later, and I would like to hand over to Virginia.
Okay, thanks, Rajiv. Thanks very much, Jana, for such a good presentation. Let me check my microphone. Fine. Well, I'd like to welcome Professor Virginia Murray. She's a public health doctor committed to improving health emergency and disaster risk management, as well as data access and transparency for effective reporting. She was appointed as head of global disaster risk reduction for Public Health England in April 2014. And since 2020, she has also been working as a senior public health advisor for COVID-19. She is a member of the Integrated Research on Disaster Risk Scientific Committee, and which is co-sponsored by the International Science Council and the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. She's co-chair of IRDR Disaster Loss Data, and she is the chair of the UN DRR ISC Hazard Classification and Review Technical Working Group. The report was published in July 2020 with the hazard information profiles and it's due to publication shortly. So she's going to share with us some information about it. Very welcome, Virginia. Floor is yours.
Virginie, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, fine, perfect.
Thank you so much, dear friend. From one Virginia to another Virginia, it is a treat that not many of us are around. So it's a huge privilege to be speaking here at the at the Changing Landscape for DRR and Risk Dynamics. It's such an important time to have this keynote session, and I'm so privileged to be able to share with you the UNDRR International Science Council Hazard Definition and Classification Review after the wonderful opening comments by Sir Peter Gluckman and Madam Mami Mitsutori. The Sendai framework, of course, is at the heart of all the work that we do. And if you look at the global outcomes in paragraph 17, it's about preventing and reducing hazard exposure and vulnerability to disaster, something that is so key to everything we do with the global hazards, the global targets that we need to come towards of reducing mortality affected people, economic loss and damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services. But it's also increasing our knowledge for every country for their national and local DRR strategies, international cooperation, and availability and access to multi-hazard early warning systems. Now, all of these really rely on this statement that sits inside the Sendai framework, which talks about all hazards, which called for the strengthening of technical scientific capacity to assess disaster risks, vulnerabilities, and exposure to all hazards. And under the open-ended intergovernmental expert working group on indicators and terminology relating to disaster risk reduction, hazards were included as a key area of work. It was described as a process, phenomenon, or human activity that may cause loss of life, injury, or other health impacts, property damage, social and economic disruption, or environmental degradation. The little trouble was that we stuck in a few annotations, and these are lengthy. And I think a lot of countries found it really hard to separate out what they might need to report on, seeing the complexity of all the different types of hazards that were thought to be relevant for the Sendai framework. And this was particularly apparent when the Sendai framework monitor system went live, and it was difficult for many of the UN member states to feel comfortable in their reporting. So at the global platform in May 2019, in the co-chair's summary, paragraph 14, it was agreed that experts from science, the United Nations, and the private sector would launch a new technical working group to develop a definitions list for the Sendai framework hazards. And this is the report that Vahini, you so kindly mentioned. It was published last summer, and I'm going to take you through it very speedily because I want to take you on to what could be done next. The whole purpose of this work was to provide a review of the Sendai Hazard Framework, hazard terminology and classification for partners addressing the all hazards paradigm. What did we mean by those hazards? And it's this incredible network, the communication and engagement of so many, from the UN aspects of where UNDRR linked to all our UN member agencies, wherever we needed to find these scientists, these experts from the World Meteorological Organization, the World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organizations, UNEC, and many, many others, who were all so engaged with the understanding of what we needed to do on hazards. But without the incredible support and engagement and commitment of the International Science Council and all their science partners, including, of course, IRDR, hooray for IRDR, CODATA, GEO, and others, that we were able to bring this incredibly rich group together. And then we added the industrial science partners of the Insurance Development Net Forum, who are absolutely amazing in supporting this. And of course, we needed something about the communities. So the International Humanitarian Organization of the International Federation of the Red Cross, Red Crescent was much engaged. But it wasn't just this technical working group. There were others who contributed so much and were so engaged. And then we had this incredible network of others who helped us to think very widely about what did we mean by hazards. So we had a very clear process using the definition, understanding what all the scientific hazard glossaries we could find, the UN glossaries, what the IRDR original peril classification that was published in 2014, to the Sendai framework, and the surveys and the consultations that so many engaged in. We developed inclusion criteria and a hazard list. And then we got recommendations and dialogue towards a more holistic and consistent approach, which I'll take you through in the end. So what were the hazards? Well, we ended up with 8 main clusters. So we had the hydrometeorological ones, which are absolutely key, which everybody expects. And Jana, you referred to these as really important. Of course they are. But increasingly, we're concerned about the extraterrestrial ones. But what worries us is that a lot of the geohazards, which are so vital for the whole world, do not have a UN family. So the science community came up and really engaged in trying to help us with these. And of course, the environmental hazards, which are increasingly important from the wildfires and others, such as sea level rise, have come up and been engaged. But I, as a medical doctor, was so delighted. We included the biological hazards, the things that had really concerned us in the health domain. So absolutely vital for us. So this is COVID-19, which we all unfortunately know far too well these days, but we've also included these hazards for human, animals, and plants. Now, COVID-19 is the only one that doesn't have a full hazard information profile, as I'll explain at the end. And we've included chemical hazards where we think they are most relevant and what have been recommended by our various consultations with other agencies. And of course, our technological hazards, be they explosions or other issues that have been identified as absolutely critical to understanding what these issues are. It could be managing waste, transport, it could be even managing cybersecurity. But there's one group of hazards that we weren't expecting to include, but were included for completeness. And this was the societal hazards. They are not in the Sendai framework, but it was thought to be useful to include them too. So this is the breakdown of our current 302 hazards. And you can see that I'm glad to say biological hazards did rather well, but my goodness, so did the hydrometeorological and the technological. And for each of these hazards, there is a hazard information profile. And that is the key deliverable that we bring to you this year. There will be a primary definition, a brief definition, which is sourced at the highest possible authority we can, and that hopefully links to UN definitions wherever we can, but not all do. We have a scientific definition wherever we feel we need it, where we feel it needs to be expanded, preferably measurable, modelable, and statistically relevant, because we need to improve our reporting. And then, of course, where we have metrics, we will include any globally agreed metric for information and guidelines, along with the relevant conventions that might be needed to be included. And some of the essential annotations, which, Jana, you have mentioned, the drivers of these hazards, what the outcomes of these hazards, and some of the risk management measures. So people who are using these hazard information profiles will get a feeling of what's being included. Now, everything is referenced, and wherever we can, we've tried to use open source information so people can go back and check it. And then we've looked for the ownership of definitions wherever we can as a UN or scientific agency or an organization so that we can maintain these hazards and keep them up to date. We know that this report is a huge step forward. It's been a massive challenge, and I cannot thank everybody enough, but we will need regular review and update. We will need to facilitate the development of a multi-hazard information system, and that's where we hope CODATA will get much involved. And at the moment, we are engaging with users and sectors for greater alignment and consistency of hazard definitions, and I'll tell you about that later. What we need is what Peter asked for, to actively engage policymakers and scientists in evidence-based national risk assessments, disaster risk reduction, risk-informed sustainable development, and other actions aimed at managing the risks of emergencies and disasters. And we know, as always, as all good scientists, we will need further research. And then to bring to the fore this understanding of addressing cascading and complex hazards and risks. Now, I just wanted to highlight just some of the wonderful key IRDR friends. So Alonso, Professor Han, John Hanmer, and there were so many others of you. And do you remember that day when you gave me a really interesting exercise in how we could do better on this when I came to China for one of the IRDR meetings? You all contributed so much to our thinking and engagement, and I cannot thank you, IRD, enough for being such an incredible voice of how we can make this better. But it wasn't just that. I need to thank two people in particular. One from the International Science Council, my very good friend, Anne-Sophie Stevens. She has been amazing, but so has Irina Zodro and now Jenty Kirschwood and her teams in trying to make sure that we link so closely to the UN DRR teams. But there's been a huge project support team. Many people have come in and out. We've had library services. We had an incredible review of the technical report, which really made it so much sharper and better, which I thank everybody and the 400 colleagues who've contributed. And I just wanted to show you some of the authors of the hazard information profiles. You were all amazing. You were the experts. We've tried so hard to reflect what we needed to learn from you. And then we've had an incredible series of reviewers, people from all the science domains and others who've really come in to help us hugely. Again, I thank you all so much. But what is this about? This is about how we try and end up with a common set of hazard definitions for monitoring and reviewing, for the Sendai framework, but increasingly we think for the SDGs and maybe even for the Paris Agreement. So this piece of work we hope will call for a data revolution, rigorous accountability mechanisms, and renewed global partnerships. But of course, because I'm medical, Professor Han asked me to do something more. He wanted me to talk about pandemics and epidemics, something that prevents us all from meeting face to face at the moment today. So we've had an incredible year, a year without precedent, according to WHO's COVID-19 response, something where we've had to learn so much and how we've had to learn together to engage. And the science behind this has been an incredible exercise yet again, and that has really helped us to understand. And I just wanted to reflect on the fact that we've been linking to the Chinese Medical Association, but even to our And what about the future? Well, we know that understanding the implications of the new thinking on hazards is being included in the global research agenda on disaster risk reduction, led by the IRDR co-sponsors and the IRDR Scientific Commission for submission to the International Science Council Board for consideration. I hope that we can take this forward. Thank you, Schwab. Thank you, Fahimi.
Thank you.
Virginia, you are muted.
Okay, sorry, thanks. Virginia, congratulations. I was saying congratulations for your conference. I think is very important, the process you have led with all these colleagues all around the world. Thank you very much. And just on time to include all kind of hazards, including biological hazards. And so I know it's been a very good, a very big effort from your part. I'd like to welcome participants to have a question, a burning question, just before we go on to next speaker. Is there any? Let me check the chat and see if any, sorry, the question and answer. Well, this one of anonymous attendee, it says to Professor Virginia, where would you put natural hazards? I think they're all over.
Natural and human-made hazards are throughout the whole of this hazard program that we've been working on. And we look forward to your comments as soon as the hazard information profiles are published. Many thanks.
Many thanks to you. So I'll hand over again to Shoaib to introduce our next speaker.
Yeah, thank you very much, Virginia, and thank you, Virginia, as well, for the wonderful presentation. Great to see you after a while. We now move on to our third and last presentation, and it is from none other than the person you've already seen, Professor Huan Dong, whom, if I went on introducing him in detail, I think that would be another keynote session. But with so many international and domestic recognitions in terms of prizes, I have met many people and scientists, but Professor Huan Dong is one who is strikingly outstanding, having been chair of various research and scientific communities like the Digital Earth, being the chair of the Integrated Research on Disaster Risk earlier, and also chair of IRDR China, and also being associated with as chair of the International Committee for Remote Sensing of Environment, and his contribution to developing the field and capacity development in China and globally cannot be is recognized by the over 500 papers and 24 books, which implies direct and indirect link to capacity development across the globe. Professor Huan Dong is going to be speaking to us on STI in supporting Sustainable Development Goals and Sendai framework. He will tell you more about what STI is. Professor Huan Dong, over to you.
Well, thank you, Chair. Really nice to meet you again, my dear friend, Dr. Novasa. So, title for my presentation, you can see I have 3 keywords. The first one is SDG. The second one is the Sendai framework. And the key one is STI. STI, science, technology, and innovation. For that, many are just focus on some kind of the model, the theory. Technology means many is space technology, big data, and big Earth data, and AI, etc., etc. You can see here we have the community. We have the different family. The family, here Sendai framework. The family climate action. The family of the SDG. So we need to give some response for the changing world because we are facing the challenge. But what kind of tool we should use? Now, just 60 years ago, United Nations have released a wonderful, mechanism. What kind of mechanism? We call it technology facilitation mechanism. So this mechanism, means that we have 3, platforms. The first platform is, the United Nations Interagency Task Team, including 10-member group. And the second platform means the STI. STI forum, just like this forum. And the third one is online the platform. Here you can see, it's an online platform. We have the 24 partners. Our program we call the Cat Earth is one of them. You can get some data there. So, TFM means we cover a lot of the technology, a lot of, series. Here we have a lot of space technology. Earth observation satellite and ground station network around the world. We have so many satellites. Just now, all of so many satellites, operate along the orbit of Earth's orbit. Right now in Beijing or outside in Beijing, in China, we have 5 receiving stations. We can receive this satellite data every day, even every hour. Talk something about the satellite. Recently China launched a lot of the satellite. Right now, China have a lot of satellites, including meteorological satellite, resource satellite, ocean satellite, disaster environment satellite. Not only, for the regular satellite, very, the medium and the low resolution satellite, but also we have very high satellites, resolution satellite. And not only we have remote sensing satellite, but also we have the Beidou satellites, that means navigation and positioning satellite. So, just say some satellite get some, the remote sensing data. Based on that, we can collect the different kind of data from the lab, from the field, from the different kind of the platform. Finally, we are charting for the program. The program, the name is the Cat Earth. So Cat Earth is the whole name is bigger data, the engineering science, the program. Right now, already we have, established the Cat Earth cloud. From this cloud, you can see we have very strong ability about supercomputing, about, storage capacity, about data analysis process, and about cloud service capability and data exchange capability, etc., etc. So, just because we have very strong ability, so most important one, already we really have some data here. You can see in the past 3 years already we have about 10 BP, the data. The data including, satellite data, also including, basic geography data, and including some atmosphere and ocean data, also other kind of data, including, biodiversity, including about other kind of, ecological data, etc., etc. So all of the data is shared. You can share. Within China can share. Within the world you can share. Our standard framework people, you can do that. As the SDG community, you can share this data. So not only this data, but also in the meantime, every day we have 3 PB new data, provide this data for you. So right now already we set up the bigger data system. Here look like Earth, that means really the digital Earth. Really Earth we only have one, but our philosophy for that, we should have so many Earths. Every day we have Earth. That means we have over 300 Earths. Every month we have Earth. That means we can have the 12 months the Earth. That means the different Earths we show different phenomena. Like this one, just show some special land degradation issues. So for use this is the platform for scientists, you can do some work online computation. For the public users, you can get some news. Also, you can get some data products. So we have already so many data, and especially bigger Earth data. So for SDG purpose, what we can do, at least 3 major ways we can use this data to do something. The first one, bigger data can feed in the missing data. The second one, the bigger data can create a new methodology. And the third one can develop some the practice cases. So it's really, really useful. Here you can see we talk something about, the Paris agreement. We talk something about the 2030 agenda. Now the Sandy framework. But what's the relation between SDG and Sandy framework? Here our IRDR community already mentioned something about this. Between the two framework, we have the similar work should do, like the SDG, the goal 1, the goal 11, the goal 13, and the Sandy framework, the ABCDEFG. So between them, we have some coherence. So by using the common platform, the common data, we can make a data-driven, science, not only for SDG, but also for Sandy framework. Take some examples, and tell something about SDG, like SDG 2, we should say something, zero hungry. So in the last, years, couple years, we are facing the challenge about, desert locust. So here, by using the big data, show you something about how we can monitor our disaster locust co-breeding area and migration passes in the 2018 to 2020 from the African to Asian countries. It's very useful. The data can give you some analysis result. And here another example about SDG 13. SDG 13, that means show what we say. We have the global change, environmental change, but we can use the data, dynamic data. We show that in Asian and African countries between 2015 to 29, we here the change lot. That means the target 13.1. That means how the stress, the resilience, and the adaptive capacity to climate-related hazard and natural disaster in all countries. So change a lot. The data can play a very important role. And also about the SDG 13, talking something about the global boundary area distribution and change. Here, give you some example. Just say, like in South America, the change significantly in 2019. So that year, just a couple of years ago, changed a lot with the increase of only one year, the 22%. Also, my colleagues just now quite often talk something about Australia's bushfire. So what's the reason? Right now, people know that just because it's extreme high temperature and drought. So it's a very important reason for bushfire on the eastern and southeastern coast of Australia. So at that time, we use our receiving station, receiving a lot of the satellite data to monitor Australia's bushfire. And here, these days, people in the science community talk a lot about, climate change. This is SDG 13.2. It's a really good example, measure and policies to climate change. CO2 emission. CO2 emission here is the global distribution and the global, analysis result. But here I can show you very important one. You can see this is the red line. Here it's just in the beginning of the last year, and here the end of last year. So what's that? That means the pandemic, COVID-19, occurred in China in last year, and end of last year. So people really work hard. Our economy recovering very, very quickly. So compare with last February and last December, you can see the difference. And also it's about CO2 sink. CO2 sink, scientists in the world, they do a lot of work, talk something about what's the reason. We do something by using the biggest data. We want to say nearly about a quarter of the global carbon sink change were attributed to the change in land use and land cover. But in China, about 1/3 of carbon sink, were attributed on land cover change, especially by the forest. So different. And here, just about show something about the SDG 14, say something about global land degradation. It's a very important result because according to SDG, according that goal, by end of the 2030, show the goal is zero land degradation. So colleagues of mine, they have the team working for that. Just compare with the result from the 2015 to 2018. So 2018 increased by about 60%. That means the net restored land area account for about the 20% of the world, making the contribution the #1 in the world. But so to say, in the world, in some countries, shows a significant decreasing trends in some region. So we are community. We have one Earth. We work for one SDG. We should work together in the future. Based on that, we really did a lot of work. Just in last couple years, we, just have wrote 2 books, 2 reports. The title of this report is, bigger data in support of sustainable development goals, in 2019 and 2020.
Science and
so here I have a video want
are
to
an
show you what's
important
that.
driving force for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. China has used big data, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and space technology to analyze and assess the progress in the achievement of the SDGs. Building on its work in 2019, the Chinese Academy of Sciences has compiled the 2020 report of Big Earth Data in support of the Sustainable Development Goals to provide supporting data for monitoring and evaluating the implementation of the 2030 Agenda under SDGs, covering zero hunger, clean water and sanitation, sustainable cities and communities, climate action, life below water, and life on land. Science.
We're just using bigger data, serving for, just the 6 goals. Here, I want to show you, in the SDG, the website, the bigger data system for SDG. If you want to know some information, if you want to download some data, here and tell you some story that what you want to know. So for the following several slides, I want to report to you that big data support SDG is really, really useful. So that's why last year, last September, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced that China will set up an international research center of big data for sustainable development goals. It's really, really exciting news for us. So from last year to now, we are working for that, established for the international center we call CBARS. CBARS mission is developing, the SDG data infrastructure and information products. And the second one is provide new knowledge for SDG monitoring. And also develop and launch some series satellite. And also establish a think tank and a capacity development for SDG, especially in developing countries. And that's CBARs. But simultaneously, now we are working for that. We have the FIBARs. The FIBARs means the International Forum on Big Data for SDG. I want to let you know that the first International Forum on Big Data for SDG will be held in the coming, beginning of September. So in Beijing, the theme is the big data toward achieving sustainable development goals. So my colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, you are really welcome to participate to attend this meeting. Tell you good news. 3 months later, CBARS will launch his first satellite. The satellite name, SDG satellites, we call the SDG Sat-1. So after launch this satellite, all of the data, you can share that. It's a scientific satellite. All of the data we can share both domestic and international. So I really hope this data, in our Santa framework community, in SD community, in Paris, agreement community, all of you are welcome to use this data. So, finally, I want to say, if you want to achieve SDG, but also the Santa framework, you can use the key of the bigger data because we have a gold key. You can use that to do what you want to do. So thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Huan Dong. And thank you very much to also Virginia and Yana. At this point in time, I would like for us to a round of applause for all the 3 presenters. Thank you so much for your inspiring presentations. We are only 2 minutes away from the end of this session, but nevertheless, we would like to give a chance to some few questions to our keynote speakers. And there is a question, some have been answered on the Q&A, on how frequently we are going to do the hazard profiling and definitions. I guess that is directed to Professor Virginia Murray. And what we're also going to do is, between me and Virginia, we have maybe 1 or 2 key questions to enable the discussions. And if you don't mind, I could start by, I would have asked many questions to each of you, but let me try to ask 1 question and you can respond, all of you, about what I think Yana mentioned as towards the end. In the complexity is the new normal. And you can think of complexity in terms of systemic risk, from climate risk, the interlinkages and connections. You can also think about the hazard definition and classifications as complex in terms of understanding what also the linkages and how they are triggered. But when it comes to data and the linkage between SDGs and Paris Agreement and Sendai framework through the indicators, it's also complex because you want to deal with one aspect in order to, to see change in other aspects. And yet the current setup globally, at least from where I work and many places I know, is a simplification and linear. So if it is about development, or it's about disaster risk reduction, let's do one small piece at a time. So what are your thoughts on how to bring these 3 elements, the climate, the systemic risk, data from multiple sources, and the classification, to engage with the policymakers so that there is an uptick of understanding of complexity in order to take much more actions around disaster risk reduction? And I would like to pass over to Virginia before we hand over to you for response.
We have very few minutes. I would like to hand over to Virginia or to Jana or to Guo for the answers, very quick.
Shall I start?
Yes, go ahead, Virginia.
Okay. So first of all, I wanted to say a huge thank you to the other speakers. What brilliant presentations, and what a great privilege it is to be part of this platform. To me, if you're looking at systemic risk, we are in the midst of it with COVID. We have to remember that. And I don't think we've ever had a world when it's had to count so many different risks, which is why I included the independent panel in issues that have been identified, which I think are very important for us to understand. But to get the data to work there accurately, we really need to have a clear understanding of what the hazards are. And this is what we hope we will have delivered with the hazard information profile. We don't know how complete they are. We know that we've got much more to do, but I hope that it will work well in at least guiding some of the UN member states in their national focal points for Sendai, but also linking to their SDG focal points through their national offices of statistics. But it's not just that, because these hazards don't happen in one place, as COVID has shown us. They can happen globally. It's bringing this together in a way that we can all talk to each other from a common language and try and work together better to try and build better early warning systems and better systems for understanding that we cannot manage what we do not measure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I also respond quickly. Thank you, Virginia. I agree, and I just have just to compliment. You mentioned, and the previous speaker also mentioned the SDG indicators, and we have a large set of indicators for the SDG, for the Sendai framework, also for measuring climate change. And but they are often not aligned in terms of their spatial and also temporal scale. And we need to think about when we think about climate extremes, they are often in a much we have to account for variability and not just an annual index, which is hard to account for the actual impacts. And for instance, for the sustainable development indicators, for instance, there is one indicator that accounts for the volatility in food prices. And this is an indicator that can be used to measure also if there is an impact of extreme events. And so I think we need to rethink the indicator efforts that we do in the individual programs, and how can they align to understand the basically connection between climate, variability, extremes, and the impact and vulnerability at local to global scale. So I think a little bit more joint effort in developing indicators would help to go towards more like complex indicators to understand risk. And like to come back, I mean, we need to understand what do we need to measure, what do we need to monitor in order to understand systemic risk. And also modeling is part of it. If we develop our model tools, climate modeling, risk modeling, we also kind of build our understanding what are the indicators that can feed into the models or be used to evaluate our models. And then these can be again feed back to the programs that kind of establish the indicators for monitoring, like the sustainable development versus Sendai, the climate indicators. So again, a big encouragement to work together also on the indicators.
Professor Wandong.
Schreib, are you calling me?
No, if Professor Wandong has any response to the question.
Well, what I said at TI, just like Dr. Jalanti and Professor Han just released the report. In this report, the IRDR report says something stand. Science and technology innovation, science technology engineering innovation, just very similar, but STEM is more complex, more integrated. Mm-hmm. But this was the general speak. So what we should say today, the data is really key, because people say humankind entering the bigger data era. That's true. So today we talk a lot, IRDR, the Sendai framework, the 2030 agenda, and the climate change. All of this, what I said, face change. But how we do response, we should have the tool. We should have, methodology. Now, the data is the tool. The data is methodology. So what I think, what I said, in the next step, we should, use the data, not just collect the data, not just share data, but data mining and data intensive science, most important. So we should, analyze the data, let the data become our really resources. So using these resources, we can analyze our, the goals, including SENA framework, the IBCDs, the goal. So anyway, today, we work together with the, our two colleagues, Virginia, really nice to meet you again. So I think we have very common, sense. The data is the best. So in the next step, we should work together, work more closely together. So for this center framework and our the ideas, the next step. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to our speakers. I think if we've run out of time. I think we are 5 minutes ahead already. Is that correct for the time? Yes. So I'd really like to thank all our speakers of this session, and very, very many thanks. I'll pass on to you, then Kunli.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shrab. Thank you for this, Virginia. Thank you for the speakers. And I just, given the time, I would like to ask the next session, Professor Rajiv Shah and Professor Irasima. Are you ready to take it immediately, or you would like to have a 3 minutes break? It's your decision, Professor Rajiv Shah.
Thank you very much, Chun-Li. I think we can start because I'm sure that some people are also quite late.
Yeah.
So if you allow, we can start.
Absolutely. Thank you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. A very good evening, good morning, good day, depending on which part of the world you are joining from. It's a great honor and privilege to be with you on this important session. My name is Rajiv Shah from Keio University in Japan. I had the privilege to be the IRDR Executive Director, and I had a very good memory of work with Professor Guo. Thank you very much for all your support, and it's really a great feeling to see all the IRDR members. Thank you very much. Along with my colleague from Mexico, Irasima, we will be moderating this particular session, which is titled IRDR Achievements and Lessons Learned. As you know that we are in constant and dynamic changes in the overall risk landscape. I think the first session has very nicely laid down the framework, the basic work which has been done over 10 years. And from the very beginning of this decade-long journey, I think IRDR has been very proactive to absorb, to adjust, and to accommodate many new changes in this overall global risk landscape. We have seen many landmark disaster events in last 10 years. We have also seen major global forum on disaster risk reduction. We have also seen the evolution of major global development and disaster risk reduction frameworks like SDG, Sendai, Paris, New Urban Agenda, and so on. So we experienced and we are possibly still facing this evolving nature of cascading, complex, and systemic risk, We heard about very nice presentations about this in our previous session, and possibly this living with uncertainty is becoming a new normal to us. All of you understand from your direct and indirect involvement in IRDR over this particular decade that IRDR serves as a global research ecosystem. And all of you are extremely, extremely important part of this ecosystem. And the beauty of this particular ecosystem is that each and every entity are equally important, be it the IRDR working group, be it the national or regional committee, be it the International Center of Excellency, and be it our very, very precious young scientists. So we have, our organizers have very carefully chosen this whole variation of this particular ecosystem. So we will listen from them, from their own experiences. And we have this extreme panel. So the way we would like to do it, that we have two major parts. In the first part, we will listen from this IRDR community representing all these different entities, and then we will spend some time for the QA session. So the first part will be moderated by my colleague Irasema, and I will moderate the second part on the QA session. So without further delay, may I invite Irasema to start the first session. Over to you, Irasema. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajiv Shah. Good day to everyone, wherever you are around the globe. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today to participate in this first main session of the 2021 International Conference on Integrated Research on Disaster Risk. My name is Irasema Alcantara-Ayala. I work at the Institute of Geography at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. I am a former member of IRDR, and I am very pleased to serve for the conference as co-moderator of this session. Today, we have a wonderful panel on the IRDR achievements and lessons learned, where we will be talking about the significant contributions of the IRDR family developed during this first decade of this international program. In the first part of the session, as already indicated, each of the speakers will have 5 minutes to share with us their accomplishments and experience gained within the IRDR umbrella. And then in the second part of our session, we will open up the floor for the discussion, which will be led by Professor Rajiv Shah, to navigate the upcoming opportunities and challenges to be more successfully engaged in integrated research on disaster risk. Please feel free to send your questions to our speakers at any time by using the Q&A. The full presentations will be available in the conference website. Well, just to note that I'm afraid I will be acting like the bad girl of the session because I will keep time strictly. So I will give a reminder to each panelist 1 minute before the allocated time is over, and I hope this is okay for all of you. In this session, we have very interesting presentations. First of all, I would like to present Dr. Bapom Fakhruddin, who is the Technical Director of DRR and Climate Resilience at Tonkin and Taylor in New Zealand. He will be sharing with us the perspective of the IRDR Working Group on Data. Welcome. The floor is yours, Professor Bapom Fakhruddin.
Thank you so much, Irasema. Hope you can see my slide.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thanks again, Professor Rajiv and Professor Irasema, for giving the floor and to come up with a summary. 10 years of program of IRDR data working group is quite difficult, but we'll try to manage it so far. So this working group mostly co-chaired by myself and as well as Professor Virginia Moody from Public Health England. And we try to worked last couple of years to making sure that data standardization, interoperability, coherence, and accessibility, how we can actually engage the the other data network, data working group, and the countries organization globally, regionally, and nationally. We try to also apply the co-data FAIR principles, that how actually connecting data to enable easier and faster discovery and accesses, as well as data to inform evidence-based research and application. And you can see one of the famous diagram that IRDR actually promote, and more than 20 countries actually apply.
Sorry to interrupt. If you can go to the slide, so please. Your
full screen mode, please, Bapon.
Yeah. Sorry. Oh, man.
Otherwise, just to make sure that the slides are moving, I mean, you can do it manually.
Right. Is it also still showing like the 2 slide?
Yes, data working group.
Okay.
You can do one by one. Yes, great.
Okay. Sorry for that. And as you can see from since before Sendai framework, we started one of the greatest work led by Professor Susan, which is more on the peril classification work. And then followed by after 2015, we worked on, me and Virginia Murray, more on the data policy and data integration and standardization works. Followed by 2019 global platform, we tried to present again that how actually the Sendai monitoring as well as Sendai data standardization could be worked more on coherence framework with sustainable development goal as well as Paris Agreement. And then since 2020, as Professor Virginia Murray already presented, that the greatest work on the more further work on the hazard definition and classification review, which beginning of the peril work that has been started in 2014. So a great amount of work has been done so far on providing policy, providing guidance. And at the same time, so we also realized that as a data working group, we also need to come to the field, to the application, how actually our data science or disaster science actually could be applied to making sure that those are actually used by the community and able to save lives and reduce the property damage. The rapid damage mapping works that has been we lead by last couple of years, more than 12 countries, including the last week in Bangladesh, they actually got supported through Geo China, RADI, as well as IRDR and CoData to provide a rapid damage mapping for 24 to 72 hours damage scenario. And Indonesia is one of the greatest benefit on that particular aspect. And as you can see also that the appreciation actually we received so far from different development organizations, even OCHA, and then DFAT and MFAT from New Zealand to providing those kind of rapid scenario mapping or pre-impact scenario mapping activities. We are also highly recognized by the GeoU4 SDG Award for our work on this rapid damage mapping on the contributing to the Sustainable Development Goal 11, which is making cities inclusive, safe, and sustainable, which has a great recognition from their side. But at the same time, we also provided several guidelines and peer review on data, DRR data. One of the greatest work also well recognized that how actually the mortality data could contribute it, then also that how we actually look at the transformation or dynamic changes based on the data that our standard operation procedure on the COVID-19 situation. But at the same time, we provided a lot of guidance on future scenario and application of disaster data data protection, data quality, visualization, as well as policy recommendation. And finally, there has been so much series of activities has been done by the data working group to engagement for capacity building and awareness. This is one of the monthly newsletter that we publish, and more than 1,000 subscribers actually right now receive those monthly newsletter. But at the same time, we continuously providing those digital transformation, the online webinar series for the community. Finally, I just like to finish with my talk of 4 or 5 recommendation or lessons that actually we learned, that the engaging with the users and sectors for greater alignment and contingency of hazard definition is quite important. We also learned that the standardization of disaster loss data quantification can help to identify gaps to assessing our overall risk assessment, and as well as understanding the risk communication process. There is a quite critical and need to ensure that a centralized data actually exists within the DRR community for hazard exposure, hazard vulnerability, as well as risk information. And finally, how we can actually make sure that climate scientists, engineers, and sectoral professionals are work together for DRR, climate change risk assessment. But finally, we'd like to say that data need to be useful, usable, and used. So unless we are able to interpret the data for the application, there is no use of those kind of data. With these things, I'd like to thanks again, Professor Rajiv and Hiroshima. Hopefully I'm on time. 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Bapun. Data on disaster risk and disaster is indeed an important topic for integrated disaster risk management. And I'm sure we could not agree more with you regarding one of your latest take-home messages. Similarly to science, data must be useful, usable, and used, and that requires its transformation into knowledge and action. Thanks to you, and of course to Professor Virginia Murray for this excellent presentation. Now we will be happy to listen to our second speaker, Professor Fan Cheng from the Institute for Remote Sensing and Digital Earth of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, who will talk about the experience of IRDR National Committee of China. Welcome to our stage.
Okay, colleagues, can you see my slides? Yes?
Yes,
good.
Thank you.
So I'm very happy to hear. My name is Fan Cheng. I'm the Secretary General of IRDR China. So I would be very happy to share the achievements and the lessons we learned in the past 10 years from the perspective of the IRDR China. So you may ask who we are. So here is the information for IRDR China. We are the National Committee in China, and it's established in the 2010. And currently, we have 42 members and from the different institutions, universities, and we have also the 15 nationwide scientific associations. And this is very, very, very good expert group. And also it's a multidisciplinary group, including the atmospheric science scientists and economics scientists, and also the policy. So we are the integrated team. So the goal of the IRDR China is to use science and technology and innovation for the disaster risk reduction in China to enhance our capacities for disaster risk reduction. So what have we achieved? I use some of the numbers here. Our main task for us is we conduct research and education and training, and also we have technology development, and also the advisory service and international network. So the numbers here is currently we have the 14 research projects internationally and domestically. And also we have 3 DR application software and system developed and shared for our just like users. And we have 8 international training workshops held in the past 10 years. And more than 200 young scientists mainly be trained. They are from the 45 countries, most of from developing countries. And we have the 9 GR reports and books published. So this is how we achieved in the past 10 years. So, and what we have learned, this is very not easy question because we have several just like the challenge in the past 10 years. And we summarize the key points we learned. One we would like to say is the research area. and we think it's a very interesting area. You know, China is the developing country. We face the very challenging issue for the urbanizations. So we think that it's very important to improve and enhance the disaster risk reduction capacities in the urban area. Because urban is a very special area, and we have the socio-economic issues, we have the scientific issues, and also urban is the place where human beings settle down. So, and for the, especially today's topic is development safety. We think for the urban area, it's the unique area for the development safety. So need to pay more attention, no matter in the past 10 years, also in the future time. So the second part we would like to mention what we learned is the means we should be adopted. As the previous speaker, Bapeng, said, the data is very, very key issues. We agree with that. We think the lack of the access and the ability for the data is a very, very challenging issue for the disaster risk reduction. And especially in the current stage, we have the COVID-19 pandemic situations. And the digital technology can help us, especially for the developing countries, to get the data and to use the different source of data driving the disaster risk reduction issue. But the thing is, how can we use the new modern technologies, digital technology, to get the data, to integrate the data? It still be the challenging use for us. So we do have some achievements, but that's not enough. We need to further work. So this is what we learned in the past 10 years. Time is very limited. I have summarized some suggestions. The first thing is as we mentioned, we call a lot about the disaster risk reduction in the past 10 years. But we think that we may lack the clear mathematical definition of the data for the disaster risk reduction. Because the data in the different categories, in the different research domain, we needed a mathematical definition to combine the data together. This is the first suggestion we suggest in the future work. The second suggestion is that we are the scientific bodies. So the scientific technology, also the scientific data-based disaster risk reduction should be enhanced, and especially in this pandemic situation. And also, we need to let the scientists involved more in the policy decision-making process. This is very important for the science-based decision-making. The third one we would like to emphasize is towards the human-oriented paradigm in disaster risk reduction. Because the disaster, why we declared about disaster? Because disaster impacted us, impacted people. So we should implement the disadvantaged groups, constructing integrated, also the demand-driven pathway to promote the social equity in the different regions. And we can address the whole disaster risk reduction together, consider the perspective from our human beings' perspective. So these three suggestions I would like to emphasize. So hope we can have the further improvements in our new research agenda. And we also, from IRDR China's view, we would also want to contribute and collaborate with the colleagues to address this issue together. Thank you very much. This is my information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Cheng. One of the great contributions from IRDR China is related to its sustained efforts to strengthening digital technology and the use of big data for disaster risk reduction. But also it is quite remarkable the way in which the research has been conducted based on the integration of data from multiple sources to building scientific capacity in disaster risk reduction in urban areas of developing countries. Thank you very much for your insights. Well, from Asia, we move to Europe and welcome Professor Myriam Merat from Paris Dauphine University. She will provide us with a panorama about the priorities of the IRDR National Committee of France. Greatly welcome, Professor Merat.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alcantara, for this introduction. So I'm sharing the slides. Hope you will be able to see it. Tell me if it's okay with you. Do you see my slides?
Yes. Could you please put full screen mode? Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. So thank you for the invitation, and let's see what have been done in France since. To understand what are the improvements in France, we have to understand how, and let me show you that, how the policy system and the interaction between the different actors is organized within at the territorial level. So, for example, the way the government interact with different ministries and how science is mobilized within different agencies and institutions, and how the separation between who produce regulation and who inspect regulation is in the same system or separate. It's the same thing to understand how the improvements are done. We have to understand what are the interaction between the government and the other actors of the society. As you may know, France is a very central system. Everything is dictated at the central level and at the national level before coming at the regional level. So we have a specific link between both the central government, other different territories and different actors, but at the same time we have exactly a specific separation between what is linked to decision and what is linked to science, with still at the Napoleonian era, a specific system that have been put in place to make a specific link between decision and science within agencies and public institutions. I have to let you know that I represent two things. So I'm a part of CNRS, that is the National Research Center in France. And mainly I'm from Dauphine University, but I'm linked to a platform that is called AFPCN. That is the French society that work on natural disaster. Within this platform, the connection between the system that I was discussing, between science and decision, are made possible. And the challenge that we have embraced within the first 10 years were done within this platform. So one of the achievements that we can share with you is the following one. I'm not going into detail within this achievement, but I will select some that are more science-driven, some other that are more policy-driven. Let me start with policy. We had something that is very important that has changed the way we deal with risk at the national level. That is this law of 30 July 2003. And that in this law, we have tried at the national level to have a kind of harmonized approach for natural and technological risk. And this law was done just after two main disasters, one in Toulouse region with an ammonitrate plant and a big explosion that we had, and also in very severe flood that occur in southern France. So this central law has changed practice and have produced different tools to manage the territorial level. A second big change in the panorama of interaction between actors is a national platform that has worked on how to share both public and private data. And the name of this platform is ONRN, National Observatory Platform on Natural Risk, mainly. And that tried to make possible the discussion between both people from the public sector and the insurance sector. That's a big challenge because one of the difficulties we had with data is confidentiality, but also heterogeneity of declaration of data. Methodologically, it's easy to deal with data. However, data has a history and an organizational history of declaration and a life cycle. And we try to work on this issue on this platform. These are for the two main achievements that we had at the national level. But let's go to some research achievement that we've done.
1 minute.
The first one is perfect. One of them, and I'm picking this one, is how to deal with the known and the unknown when we have to interact with different actors at territorial level. So the achievement were both in the way the interaction between the different actors are happening, more participative or deliberative one, but also how to open science to society. Call it expertise process that is mobilized when you deal with risk and disaster. I'm not going into detail, but let me tell you that this issue linked to ethics in when we deal with risk, when we produce expertise, and when it comes to decision, has become one of our main focus these last years. It will be a main challenge that we will have here. I hope that you are looking at my screen, and a need to work on ethical issues, and we see it with the COVID crisis, where a lot of things are pointed out as being a problem when it comes to the mobilization of science to decision. Another point that should be discussed is how to make possible the discussion between different science, mainly between engineering science, social science, and life science. Going to stop here. Please feel free to ask me more questions, and I will be happy to share with you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, all dimensions of disaster risk are very challenging, and indeed you have shared with us a very substantial list of them. And ethical issues are very important for policy making indeed. Thank you very much. Now we travel to Iran and cordially welcome Professor Mohsen Ghaffori Ashtiani from the International Institute of Earthquake Engineering and Seismology, who will address the main efforts of the IRDR National Committee of Iran. Thanks for being with us. The floor is yours, Professor Ghaffori.
Hello, everybody, and good morning, good afternoon, good night. Do you have my screen or not?
Yes, just full screen, please. Thank you.
Do you have it?
Yes, fine now.
Okay,
thank you.
Good to see everybody, and I would like to just give a very brief of a roadmap of our activity that we have, doing in Iran. We are trying to expand our national committee member. We have 2 new members, which I will show them, introduce them to you. We are promoting risk reduction dialogue among scientists and public and policymakers. We try to provide consultancy to policymakers. We are promoting integrated look at risk and resilience, especially, for example, earthquake resilient cities, insurance, hospitals, and risk-based system analysis and risk-based strategy, and also doing the water, and also promoting the multi-hazard approach, especially in Iran right now, with earthquake, flood, and pandemic, and also the SFDRR. We have a new member of our IRDRC National Committee. There's a newly established institute by UNESCO in Iran. It's called Regional Education and Research Center on Earthquake Risk Management and Resilience for West and Central Asia. It's been approved by the UNESCO General Conference in 2019. And the mission of this institute is assist countries located in the West and Central Asia in earthquake risk reduction and management, and in developing appropriate methodologies to make them resilient to potential earthquake based on physical, socioeconomic, and cultural characteristics. This is a joint UNESCO institute with the IIES, and they have agreement, as you see, signed by the Minister of Iran and the UNESCO General Director. And this institute is a new member of IRDRC. We also, which I'm not going to go through it, this is their objective, which since due to the limit of time, I have shared this slide. I'm not going to go through it. Also, we have a new member, is the Insurance Risk Management Institute, also which they are working on the research, education, and consulting institute in the field of hazard and risk analysis, and mainly through risk modeling and also catastrophe risk insurance, and also developing the insurance model. And these are some of the activities, for example, they do. They provide insurance rating, the solvency for insurance companies. And this is a private-based institute. Therefore, we have now a new private and a public institute join the IRDRC. One of the work that this SPRMI is doing is working with the YASA and Iran National Science Foundation to develop the CAT-SIM model for Iran. They work with the YASA, they know this decision-making for governments is an economic decision-making tool that governments can make based on the risk. Therefore, it's a risk assessment, financial risk assessment, measuring resource gap and consequence of financial gaps and reducing financial vulnerability. We had, since last time I reported, we had the C8 conference. IRDR was participating, and we also had a special session on the hospital safety as one of the roadmap that we have developed. And we cooperated with the developing of the guideline for safe hospital and guideline for the assessing and retrofitting of existing healthcare. This was done also in the cooperation with the UN Habitat. We had participated in different conferences. We use IRDR flag. And as I said, some of them I have explained. We are doing a lot of work on nexus approach for urban resilience. As I said in the roadmap, that we are promoting the multi-hazard approach, integrated look at risk and resilience. And I give you some examples here that I will show. For example, one of the problems that we have is everybody doing their own work. And we provide to put synergy among the players in the urban resilience, bring them together and have a system approach look to integrate them, and then provide a nexus approach in order every activity to become integrated. This is the approach that we are taking. Is a very hard way, is a very long way to go. And we think that in order to have achieve a safe and resilience progress and sustainable development, we need to have this integration. How we do it? We are developing a gap analysis.
1 minute,
this
please.
This is the gap analysis. I asked for 7 minutes and gave me 7 minutes. And this is we are preparing, now you tell me go fast, I cannot talk. Anyhow, we are doing a gap analysis here because we think we need a paradigm shift of what we're doing. Therefore, we ask questionnaire about this on the hazard, socioeconomic, governance, and risk management. We look at it two ways. One is a technical aspect, and one is a policy aspect. These two we have to go together in order to achieve this urban resilience. And we're developing actually an integral risk model for that. We try to put everything and we try to develop a toolbox. And we think that GEM has done for the risk. And I think we would like to promote that IRDR national committees with the joint support of IRDR, a steering scientific community to go to develop this resilience and risk integrate as a model and support this one. Another thing that is very important, we have housing is very important issue in most countries, whatever country solve the housing problem is successful. And we are looking at the housing at a different angle, safe, affordable, and comfortable. And this needs to be done through the system modeling approach. We developed this housing concept from economic, from political, from technical, from cultural, and from legal. And we are developing a system modeling with the stakeholders, which I'm going very quickly. We're developing this system approach that, again, from economic and technical. This, again, is something that we are promoting as an integration. If you see that activity we are doing mostly are integrated approach, nexus
Please
approach.
conclude your presentation.
Now, my conclusion is this. My colleagues in Iran, they're asking, what IRDR scientific community doing for us? I'd like the IRDR management answer us, Rajiv Shah and other ones. We need more support from IRDR. The question is raised, what is the added value of being IRDR? I mean, what IRDR gives us? And how IRDR can help the national communities. We would like to we expect more involvement of Iranian experts in IRDR international activities. We do not see, I mean, there is a great amount of potential exists in Iran, and we think that these sanctions that is avoiding the IRDR to benefit from the capacity that exists in Iran, and we have proposal for implementations, and we would like that, you know, the IRDR scientific committee is taking into action. Therefore, our message is that we expect IRDR scientific community, we expect IRDR secretariat to have more engagement with our Iranian colleagues. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your kind presentation, Dr. Ghaffori. Now we go back to Europe and to England to welcome Professor Mark Pelling from the Center for Integrated Research on Risk and Resilience at King's College London, who I'm sure will share with us insights from the IRDR International Center of Excellence in Risk Interpretation and Action. Professor Pelling, you have the stage. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm just trying to share my screen. I have to bear with me for 1 second. I'm just busy shutting down elements of my computer so that I can, in fact, share.
Okay. Do not forget to send your questions to the panelists, and we will have time in the second section to further discussion.
Brilliant. You should be able to see my screen now. Apologies for that.
Could you go to full screen, Mark? Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so first of all, just let me say thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you for 4 or 5 minutes. And I will simply make 4 points. And as I go through some slides, there's some work that will illustrate some of those points, but feel free to read it. I won't talk in detail about the underlying science. You can see here some of the core team. Of course, it's very much a collaborative effort, and there are many international collaborations, some of which through the IRDR network that I'll mention towards the end. I would very much agree with some of the comments already made in terms of lessons learned about the changing nature of risk and the position of research in relation to policy, that risk and resilience work is engaging with an increasingly systemic or complex landscape, and that increasingly one tries to bring together an awareness of risk and resilience that comes from a technological kind of core science understanding, but also, and Moshe made this point, an understanding of policy and the policy and values and culture within which risk lands. So my first point is very much building on that, which is that risk and resilience we might see as technical terms or technical objects built of a set of metrics. But of course, in the real world, these are ideas that are socially constructed and often used quite instrumentally by different groups. Our work here is in cities, Cape Town, Manila, and Nairobi, to reinforce particular viewpoints or policy positions within the city. So just to highlight the first graph here, graph A, which asks the question, why is science used? You can see the majority of respondents in our cities said that science was used to promote a technical agenda to provide security to the city. Relatively few were able to say that science was used instrumentally to enhance social justice and environmental protection. And similarly, when one asks what sort of approaches are used, how is science used, the vast majority of people that we spoke to said that science was a tool deployed in a rather top-down manner by elite institutions of either the government or the academy. And though there are examples of more bottom-up, community-driven ways within which science is engaged to promote a certain set of ideas. So I think this is important for us as we go forwards to appreciate not just the technical excellence that IRDR can bring, but an understanding of the social context within which our work is used by others. A second point illustrated by this slide is to pick up the idea of complexity. Here, some work illustrated from Nairobi, where we map individual single hazards against other single hazards in order to try and visualize multi-hazard relationships. You can see in Nairobi, there are 114 potential hazard interrelationships. And of course, this rather changes fundamentally the way in which risk is managed if it's to be seen as a set of interacting hazards intervened by social variables, by what one might call dynamic vulnerability, rather than a set of individual hazards managed by respective ministries of water or fire or what have you, or interests in emergency response. So a simple example you see on the right-hand side where, and you'll be familiar with this, of course, by theory, but management agencies are often not, where storms can lead to landslides, which can lead to a more complex flood environment. A third point to make is around the extent to which the research methods we already deploy and have huge experience of within the risk community, far more experience than, say, the climate change community. How many of those methods are transferable? And we see here a transferability that's been appropriate to the COVID-19 crisis. Again, an example from Nairobi, where we worked with community-based organizations to map their interventions, and this is ongoing work. So there's close to 90 community-based interventions in Kibera, which is one of the largest slums in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a slum with an awful lot of community activity. And the main message here is, of course, that there's a lot of leadership coming from slums, but the methods of data collection and representation that we use in natural hazards work is applicable here as well. Just the penultimate slide, this comes from a particular project. There's lots of material, but I'll just say one thing, which is the diagram on the left. The circles with the red arrows is very much the contemporary risk modeling context, where one tries to bring together social hazard data, perhaps provide some scenarios. And what, of course, many of us realize, but we now try to put into action, is that really the hard work is around the decision-making fora within which those tools are embedded, and that research has a responsibility to help convene the places within which science unfolds. In fact, we're trying to move from trying to present a best representation of risk through a modeled approach to providing different stakeholders the ability to develop different metrics so that science, a single methodology, can facilitate different expressions of risk and resilience that reflect the interests of different actors, government, communities, men, women, and so on. And a last slide, sorry, Irasima, I'm sure I've overrun, is just simply to acknowledge the community building capacity that IRDR has brought to us in the RIA group. We've been able to establish the UK Alliance for Disaster Research, which brings together about 30 of the main national research institutions, including Public Health England, that Virginia Murray's already spoken to. And the aim of this group is very much to act as a science platform for the Sendai framework. So that's come out indeed of the relationships built through IRDR, and also in a similar way, reaching out of the UK into Europe. Membership of the ESTAG, I think, comes through some of the experiences and capacities that IRDR brings. And I see Miriam and others here also associated with the ESTAG. So there's genuinely a very strong footprint that IRDR, I think, can show it has led, certainly in the European region. So on that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark, for addressing the complexity of disaster risk and policy making, and congratulations for the great network that you have been building along these years. Well, last but not least, to close the panel presentations with a fresh outlook, I have the pleasure to welcome an IRDR young scientist, Professor Missam Bustanul Fouadi Bisri from Kobe University. Bill, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good day to all the participants. Thank you very much, Professor Rajiv and also Prof. Ira, for the kind introduction. It is a privilege and also a great honor for me to be here to represent the community of the IRDR Young Scientist Fellow. May I check whether you can see my screen at this point of time, and only the screen, only the slideshow?
Yes, it is fine. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. And I'm here to share the lessons learned reflection out of the journey of the IRDR Young Scientist Fellow program, and also some of the reflection and also suggestion for moving forward. And allow us to take a moment to commemorate in memoriam Dr. Hastoro Winanto Aji, IRDR Young Scientist Fellow, who left us earlier during this hard time. And as Professor Rajiv said, one of the brightest IRDR Young Scientist Fellow that we've ever known. And the IRDR Young Scientist Program Fellow initially conceived in 2014 through the World Social Science Fellows workshop, and also formally later started in 2016, which application accepted twice every year, following 4 batches of selection. And up to this point, there are 164 young researchers, young scientists from 46 countries have been involved, and 43 of them are female young scientists. And we kindly encourage you to look at the IRDR science report 2010-2020, and also look at the reference with regards to the portfolio and also activities of the Young Scientist Fellows Program. So what have been done in the past 10 years? Naturally, we are, as young scientists, we are grateful to the facilities and opportunities provided by the IRDR to go beyond scientific outreach, beyond professional capacity development, but also to support advocacy and also science policy actions in disaster risk reduction and beyond. And IRDR young scientists are in a unique position because we can leverage to both UN major group. One is the children and youth, and another one is the science and technology communities, whereby our voice can be heard in 2 fora and continuously shaping the agenda leading to all the 2015 development agendas, SFDRR, Paris Agreement, and so on. And also now until 2020, how it evolves and also it has been implemented over the years. And this leads to 2 monumental road intervention. One is the Young Scientist Roadmap, which is this is also sponsored and released during the GPDRR back in 2017, and also we continue advocating for more spaces for young scientists to do more research, to express themselves, and also to do intervention directly to the community, to the policymaker. And at the end of the day, the IRDR young scientists also contribute in the inception of the U-Inspire Alliance. It is a platform for youth and also young professionals in the field of science, engineering, technology, and innovation for disaster risk reduction. This is really a bottom-up process to empower the platform and to provide and also empower youth and young professionals from bottom up, from local to national to global, for contributing their science and technology to risk reduction. Over the years, naturally, young scientists continue working with their senior scientists, publishing research paper and other scientific products. And also, we are grateful for the opportunity to ensure that the product of young scientists also be included in the major publication by the UN, for instance, the status of science and technology in disaster risk reduction in Asia Pacific, among others. And also, this year, we also released the IRDR edited book. There are 18 chapters, and there are within 3 sections that we strongly encourage all the participants to read. One section, one part is on the characterization of hazards, vulnerability, and risk. Another one on the governance and management of disaster risk, and lastly, emerging topics from the research of the IRDR Young Scientists. So those are the activities and products of the IRDR Young Scientists Fellowship Program over the years. Now, what are the reflections from our side? And I also tried to talk with other Young Scientist Fellow through the IRDR Young Scientist Program and interaction with the senior scientists. As young scientists, we learned that we need 5 Ps in order to become the future world-class scientists, to ensure our product, our research, and also product making positive impact across the globe. One is PhD. Of course, some of the IRDR Young Scientists Fellows start from a master level, but through this fellowship, they are motivated to really pursue higher education and also to leverage on the doctorate degree as the stamp, as a good shoes to be productive and also to produce good science for the better of our society. And we also learn and get inspired that to become a world-class scientist, we need products, of course, scientific products, papers, publication, and etc. But this is also not enough. Some of us goes towards entrepreneurship, startup creation. We have IRDR Young Scientists who creates research-based startup in Indonesia, in India, and also in Nepal, and we learn among each other, and we want to improve the products of IRDR Young Scientists. We also learn from our senior scientists and the interaction within the program that we need to have the third P, which is people. Internally for ourselves is able to manage, to create and manage a super team, but also to influence others. We learn from the passion of all the IRDR community and also ecosystem to really confidently expressing our own research passion, life mission, and also try to be inspirational in terms of risk reduction. And also through this ecosystem, great examples from all the distinguished professors, scientific leaders, that at the end of the day, it's also about performance, whereby externally, outside of ourselves, we need to be able to influence global knowledge discourse and also collaborate to solve global problems. But also we learn to maintain the performance of a good or as a world-class scientist, we need to be able to mentor others. So this is where I think most of the IRDR Young Scientists Fellow also now start to look into generation below us, those in the 20s, and then we try to build intergenerational communication with them to nurture more innovators for risk reduction. And another reflection that I would like to share in this important forum, perhaps
could you please conclude, Vital?
Come again?
Please conclude.
Yes, this is my final slide. And perhaps for the IRDR Young Scientists program, perhaps this is the time for moving higher with the vertical development. There are 2 development in terms of capacity building. Horizontal one, it's all about knowledge and also skills to be excellent scientists, to be able to navigate global science policy action landscape. But perhaps through the IRDR Young Scientists program, we can go towards vertical leadership development, whereby we push all the IRDR Young Scientists to be future collaborators to make a better world. And our suggestion is perhaps the young scientists can be all the achievers. And later, through this program, we need to push them towards becoming a collaborator, because at the end of the day, this is what will be critical for ensuring advancements of risk science for development safety. I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Bisri, for your presentation. And communication across generation is one of the issues that has been strongly supported by the IRDR Young Scientists Program. And as you mentioned, passion is indeed one of the drivers that makes you indispensable to move towards disaster integrated research on disaster risk. Now I give the microphone back to Professor Rajiv Shah to lead the discussion. Thank you. Back to you, Rajiv.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Irasema, and thank you to all our esteemed speakers. We are just on time to finish the session, but since we have started a little bit late, if with the kind permission of our organizer, can we extend it for another 4 to 5 minutes because we started 4 to 5 minutes late? Is that okay, Chun-Li?
Yeah, yes, of course. Please.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I saw some of the questions who have put in the Q&A, and our colleagues and panelists have already answered some of them. But now if you have any burning question, like most of the information you will be able to get either in the respective website, the ICOE's website, or in the IRDR website. So I encourage you to look at that. But if you have any specific burning question or comment, please raise your hand so that I can unmute you. So can you, if there is any question.
Rajiv, may I say something?
Very briefly.
Yes, the point that I mentioned in my last part of the presentation, I'd like to have some reaction from the IRDR scientific committee or from the IRDR chair, you know, how IRDR can be more more be involved with the national committees, you know. We in national committees, we do activities in the name of IRDR.
I understand your point, thank you. So I think we will come back to that issue maybe in the little bit later part of the, like tomorrow or day after tomorrow, when we are presenting the future of IRDR, unless our organizers want to just make any specific comments at this point. Chun-Li, is that okay that we come back these issues, that how IRDR will be involved in the national committee
yes.
tomorrow or after tomorrow?
Yes, you're right. This can come later in the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any specific question from the audience? Anybody who wants to? I don't see any hand yet. Yeah, okay, Rashid Khan. Yes, please. Please make your comment brief. Please unmute yourself. Rashid, you are permitted to talk, I think, as per my screen, but yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, loving the session. Thank you so much for having me on the question board. My quick question is, how the IRDR will be expanding to the rest of the world? Specific question is for the Young Scientist Program. So what is the next steps of that expansion?
Okay, thank you very much. I think, again, we will come back about the future of IRDR in the session tomorrow. And this particular session, we are discussing about the achievement which has been there in the past 10 years. And definitely much of this, what you heard today, will be continued beyond. So again, as Chun-Li also pointed out earlier, that we will listen to the future roadmap in tomorrow's session, and there possibly we will have some more reflection. Thank you. Any possibly last question or last point, if anybody wants to? Okay, so I don't see further hand. So I think, thank you very much once again from my side. I personally always enjoy this very enriching dialogue of this different component of IRDR. And what you heard today, I must emphasize that this is only a small part of this larger network. We had only one working group, 3 NC, one and ICOE, and one representative of the young scientists. So I'm sure that there are lots of other good work. Maybe I would like to request Irashima for your concluding remarks. Once again, thank you very much for all your excellent presentation. Over to you, Irashima.
Thank you very much, Rajiv. Well, our goal today was to discuss the achievements and lessons learned by the IRDR community in these 10 years of commitments. And this included how IRDR has been engaged in the global, regional, national, and local spheres. However, we still have a series of challenges ahead of us to truly support the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and to achieve coherence with the other international landmarks. Well, therefore, we are very much looking forward to addressing the new Disaster Risk Reduction Global Research Agenda tomorrow. And finally, we would like to say a very big thank you to our invited speakers and to you all for your participation in this session. It was an extremely rich panel. And our deep thanks also go to Professor Sang and Professor Song, both from the Aerospace Information Research Institute of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, for their valuable contribution as reporters of this session. Xie xie, and see you tomorrow. Thank you very much to everyone. Good night, good day, good afternoon.
Thank you, Professor Irashima. Thank you, Professor Rajiv, and distinguished speakers. Excellent report, very rich. Dear colleagues, just for tomorrow, we start at the UTC 11 o'clock for important session, main session 2, Global Research Agenda, and followed by main session 3, the insight and reflections of Global Research Agenda on DRR and the implementation. I think the two questions raised from audience and also from Professor Mezan, from Ashtani, that are going to be discussed tomorrow. For the lessons learned, the challenges, the problems, the expectations from ICOEs, national committees about IRDR. In fact, in the compilation, we already have many of the feedback already documented in the report. Please download the document, especially chapter 4 and 5, and look at the comments and suggestions for the future of IRDR from colleagues, members of IRDR community. And with this, and